Long ago, when the land turned dry, and the sky refused to answer, one small medieval village faced a simple question. How do you survive when water disappears? Tonight, let me tell you their story. The summer arrived quietly. There were no storms to announce it. No sudden heat. No sharp change in the sky. It came the way many summers did in the Middle Ages. Slowly, patiently, as if it planned to stay longer than anyone expected. The village sat in a wide valley, surrounded by low hills and thin forests. Stone houses stood close together, their roofs dark with age. Narrow dirt paths wound between them, carrying the marks of years of footsteps, carts, and animals. At the center of the village stood the well. It had always been there, long before anyone could remember who built it. Long before the names of the first families were forgotten. Every morning, people came to this well. They brought wooden buckets, clay jars, iron hooks worn smooth by hands. They waited their turn without speaking much. Water was not something to discuss. It was simply there. Or so they believed. But this summer was different. On one quiet morning, a woman lowered her bucket into the well. She waited for the sound she had heard all her life, the soft splash of water far below. It did not come. Instead, the bucket struck stone. A hollow sound echoed upward. She lifted it slowly. Inside was only damp wood and a thin layer of dark mud. She did not shout. She did not run. She simply stepped aside and let the next person try. By midday, everyone knew. The well was drying. Not empty. Not yet, but lower than it had ever been. The sun climbed higher each day. Its light felt heavier, pressing down on the roofs and fields. Dust began to rise from the paths, clinging to clothes and skin. The fields beyond the village looked tired. Wheat bent too early. The color was wrong, pale, dull, uneven. Leaves curled inward as if protecting what little life remained inside them. Animals drank slowly, carefully. Cows no longer pushed forward at the trough. They seemed to sense something had changed. At night, the village was unusually quiet. People slept with windows open, hoping for cool air. But the air did not move. There was no wind, only warmth that lingered, refusing to leave. In the small stone church, the bell rang as it always had. But its sound felt different now, slower, heavier. The priest spoke of patience, of faith, of seasons that tested the soul. The villagers listened in silence. They had lived through hard winters. They had known sickness. They had buried children and parents alike. But drought was different. Cold could be fought with fire, darkness with candles, hunger with stored grain. But thirst offered no comfort. Water did not obey prayers easily. Each morning, the line at the well grew longer. Each bucket brought up less. People began to watch one another more closely. Not with anger, not yet, but with awareness. Who took more time at the well, who filled their bucket too high, who returned twice in one day. No one spoke of rules. Rules did not need words in times like this. Children were told not to play near the well. Women washed clothes less often. Men stopped cleaning tools unless absolutely necessary. Water was no longer part of daily life. It became a decision. The village elder, a man with a back bent by years of labor, stood near the well one afternoon. He said nothing. He only watched the rope slide down. He counted the seconds. When the bucket returned, he nodded slowly. That night, families sat together in the dark. Candles were saved. Voices were low. Some spoke of past summers. Others remembered stories told by grandparents. Stories of dry years when rivers disappeared, and people walked for days to find water. Most said nothing at all. Outside. The ground cracked in thin lines. Not deep, just enough to be noticed. The earth itself seemed to be holding its breath. As days passed. The stream beyond the village thinned to a narrow ribbon. Fish vanished. Frogs stopped singing at night. The forest grew silent. Even birds left. The well-keeper, a quiet man chosen more for trust and strength, began to sleep beside the well. Not because anyone told him to, but because he felt he should. He listened at night. To the rope, to the bucket, to the deep darkness below the stone ring. Sometimes he lowered the bucket just to hear the sound. Sometimes he heard nothing at all. The absence of water became a presence of its own. It followed people into their homes. Into their dreams, children dreamed of rain, of puddles forming in the dirt, of waking with wet hair and cold feet. Adults dreamed less. They lay awake, counting breaths, listening for thunder that never came. The sun rose again, and again, and again. Each day looked the same. No clouds, no relief. Only the slow understanding spreading through the village. This was not a short drought. This was a test, not of strength, but of patience, of restraint, of how long people could survive with less than they believed they needed. The well still held water, somewhere far below, but everyone knew the truth. Water was no longer guaranteed, and once that certainty was gone, nothing felt permanent anymore. The summer continued, quietly, relentlessly, and the village waited. In the village, water was no longer something people assumed would be there. It had become something they thought about. Every action now carried a quiet question. Do we really need water for this? The well stood at the center of the village, unchanged in appearance. The same ring of worn stone, the same wooden beam, the same rope, rough and dark from years of use. But the way people approached it had changed. They walked more slowly. They waited more patiently. They spoke less. No one laughed at the well anymore. In earlier summers, children played nearby. They chased one another in wide circles. They splashed water onto the ground without fear. Now, they were told to stay back. Water was not for play. It was for survival. The village elder gathered the families one evening as the sun lowered behind the hills. No one was ordered to come. They came because they felt they should. He stood with his hands folded, his voice low and even. "There is still water," he said, "but there is less each day." No one interrupted him. We must begin to choose how we use it. That word, choose, stayed in the air longer than the others. In the Middle Ages, water had never been a personal matter. It belonged to everyone, and to no one. Now, it demanded decisions. The elder did not give rules. He gave guidance. Children first, then the sick, then the animals that still worked the fields. After that, whatever remained. No one argued. They knew the truth already. That night, small changes began. People stopped washing their hands unless they had to. They wiped them on cloth instead. Faces were cleaned with damp fingers, not poured water. Cooking changed. Soups grew thinner. Bread grew harder. Water was measured, not poured. Women began to save water from cooking vegetables. That same water was used to clean tools. Then it was poured onto the roots of plants, closest to the house. Nothing was wasted. Bathing disappeared almost entirely. Once a week became once a month. Then not at all. Bodies grew dusty. Hair stayed tied back, hidden beneath cloth. No one complained. Comfort was a luxury the village could know longer afford. The animals felt the change quickly. Cows were led to the trough in smaller groups. Each was given time. No rushing, no pushing. Some animals were sent away. Better to sell them now than watch them die later. Sound of hooves leaving the village felt heavier than it should have. Fields were walked more. Often. Men pressed soil between their fingers. They studied cracks in the earth. They spoke in quiet tones, sharing little hope. Wheat was cut early in some places, even though it was not ready. Better to save something than lose everything. The village priest continued to speak of faith, but even his words had changed. He no longer promised rain. He spoke instead of endurance, of humility. Of learning to live with less. At night, people dreamed differently. There were fewer dreams of feasts and warmth, more dreams of empty cups, of reaching for water and waking before touching it. Children began to ask questions. Why can't we wash today? Why does the well sound different? Parents answered softly, because we must be careful. Because the earth is tired. No one spoke of punishment anymore. The drought felt too quiet for anger. One morning, a young man was seen returning to the well after sunset. He thought no one noticed, but the well keeper noticed everything. The man was not stealing. He did not take more than his share, but the act itself mattered. The next morning, the elder spoke to the village again. Not with blame, not with accusation. He simply reminded them that water belonged to the village, or it would belong to no one. The young man lowered his head. That was enough. Trust was fragile now. Every bucket carried weight beyond its contents. As days passed, the village learned a new rhythm. Morning, collect water. Midday, protect what remained. Evening, plan for tomorrow. Time felt slower. The sun moved more slowly across the sky. Or perhaps people simply watched it more closely. Clouds became events. When a thin line of white appeared in the distance, people stopped what they were doing. They looked up. They waited. Most clouds passed without offering anything. Still, hope returned with them each time. The well keeper continued his silent work. He adjusted the rope. He marked the length. He knew, by touch alone, how far the bucket traveled. Each night, he slept lightly. He dreamed of stone walls growing deeper, of water retreating further away. The well was no longer just a place. It was the heart of the village. And like a heart, everyone listened for signs of weakness. One afternoon, the bucket returned with more mud than water. The well keeper did not say anything. He only cleaned the bucket and tried again. That night, no one spoke during supper. Bread was passed hand to hand. Water cups were half filled. The youngest child drank first. Then the next. then the next dot by the time the cup reached the adults. There was little left. No one complained. Silence had become a language of its own. The village was learning something older than laws, something older than faith. That survival was not loud. It was quiet, careful, shared. The drought did not break. The sky did not change, but the people did. They learned to live within limits. To watch one another, to move more slowly, to take only what they needed. Water was no longer just water. It was time. It was trust. It was the difference between staying and leaving. And the village held on, one day at a time. The fields lay beyond the last row of houses. They had always been there, stretching gently toward the hills. In spring they carried promise. In summer they carried work. Now they carried worry. Each morning the farmers walked out before the sun grew too strong. They moved slowly, tools resting on their shoulders. The ground beneath their feet felt different. It no longer pushed back. It crumbled. The soil, once dark and heavy, had turned pale and loose. When lifted, it slipped through fingers like ash. The wheat stood lower than it should have. Its heads were thin, its color uneven. Some stalks had already turned yellow. Weeks too early. The men bent down and inspected the roots. They spoke quietly. If at all. There was nothing more to say. The earth was not receiving what it needed. Without rain, the fields began to change their sound. When wind passed through them, it made no music, only a dry whisper. A sound that ended quickly. In places where the ground dipped, a few plants still survived. Their leaves held on, stubborn and curled. But most of the fields had given up growing. By midday, the sun pressed hard on the land. Heat rose from the soil, bending the air above it. Farmers returned home. Early. There was no reason to stay. Work could not force water from the sky. In the village, the change was felt immediately. Bread grew smaller. Meals became quieter. People counted loaves the way they once counted days. Grain stores were checked and rechecked. The elder walked among them with care. He did not promise enough. He promised honesty. There was grain for now, but not for long. Livestock suffered next. Goats chewed slowly, pulling dry grass from the edges of the fields. Cows stood in shade whenever they could find it. Milk became thin, then rare. Some families chose to slaughter animals earlier than planned. The meat was salted and shared. Nothing was wasted. Everything was measured. Children were kept indoors during the hottest hours. They sat near doorways and windows, watching the dust outside. Their games became quieter, their laughter less frequent. At night, the field smelled different. Not of growth, but of dust and heat. The wind carried the scent into the village, reminding everyone what was being lost. One afternoon, the elder gathered the farmers. They stood at the edge of the fields, hats pulled low, faces tired. He spoke plainly. Some land would be abandoned, not forever. Just for now. Better to save strength than to lose it. The worst fields would be left untouched. The better ones would receive whatever water could be spared. No. One argued. Choices like this left no room for pride. Water was carried in small amounts to the nearest plots, poured carefully at the roots. Not enough to restore growth. Only enough to delay death. The act itself felt symbolic. As if tending the land was a way of saying goodbye. In the village, people began to talk about time differently. Not in weeks, not in months, but in meals. How many meals remain? How long can we stretch what we have? The priest's sermon shortened. There was no need for long words. People needed rest more than guidance. The church stayed open during the day. Not for prayer alone, but for shade. Old stone walls held cool air longer than any house. People sat inside quietly, breathing slowly. The sound of footsteps echoed softly. The bell no longer rang at noon. The rope had grown dry and stiff. Everything felt tired. The wallkeeper continued his work. He noticed the water level had dropped again, only slightly, but enough. He marked the rope with a knot. Then another. Each knot meant a little less hope. At night, the fields looked almost peaceful. Moonlight softened their emptiness. Shadows hid the damage. From a distance, the land appeared unchanged, but those who walked among it knew better. They felt the silence. There were no insects, no movement. Just dry stems brushing against one another. One evening, a young boy asked his father if the fields were sleeping. The father paused before answering. "Yes," he said. "They are resting." It was easier than the truth. The village began to prepare for harder choices. Tools were repaired and stored. Anything broken was fixed now, while hands were still strong. Clothing was patched. Shoes were worn carefully. Nothing new would come for a long time. The elder spoke. With neighboring villages, some were worse off. Some no better. Everyone was conserving. Everyone was waiting for rain. Or for the strength to endure without it. The fields did not recover, but neither did they disappear. They remained. Dry, silent witnesses to the passing of days. The village learned to look at the land without expecting anything from it. And in doing so, they learned something else. That survival was not about forcing the earth to give. It was about knowing when to stop. Asking. The sun set again. And again. And again. The fields stood still. And the village held on. The sky did not change. That was what troubled people most. Each morning, it looked the same. Clear. Pale. UMOVING. There were no dark edges on the horizon. No heavy clouds drifting in from distant lands. Just light. Endless light. In the Middle Ages, the sky was not empty space. It was a sign. A message. People believed it listened. So when the drought continued, the village turned its attention upward. The church became fuller. Not suddenly. Not desperately. But steadily. People entered quietly, heads lowered. They sat on worn benches, hands folded. Candles were lit less often now. Wax was precious. Light was saved. The priest stood at the front, his voice calm and familiar. He spoke of patience, of waiting, of trust. His words were gentle. He did not raise his voice. He did not promise miracles. He only reminded them that silence did not always mean absence. The villagers listened. Some closed their eyes. Others stared at the stone floor. Prayer during drought was not loud. It was slow, measured, people prayed for rain. But more than that, they prayed for strength, for calm minds, for steady hands, for the ability to endure without breaking. Outside the church, the bell rope hung untouched. Ringing the bell for rain was an old custom. But it had not helped before. Now, no one reached for it. Faith did not need noise. Processions began instead. Once a week, the villagers walked the paths together. Slowly, quietly, they carried no banners. No symbols, only themselves. Bare feet touched the dry ground. Dust rose with each step. They walked past the fields, past the thinning stream, past the edge of the forest. The priest walked among them. Not ahead, there were no chants, only footsteps. The sky watched without response, at night. Prayers continued in homes. Families gathered before sleeping. Words were whispered, children learned new prayers. Short ones, easy to remember. Let us last. Let us wake. Tomorrow. Not everyone prayed. Some sat in silence instead. Silence felt honest. The drought stripped belief down to its simplest form, no. One asked why anymore, why brought no. Comfort, they asked how to keep going. How to share fairly. How to remain human when everything else was drying up. The priest noticed the change. His sermons grew shorter. He spoke less of heaven, more of the present moment. He reminded then that caring for one another was also a form of prayer. That patience was a kind of faith. The church became a place of rest. People sat inside during the hottest hours. Stone walls held the cool. Breathing slowed, thoughts softened. The quiet felt safe. Outside, the sky remained empty. Clouds came once, thin and pale. People stopped and watched. They waited. Nothing fell. The clouds passed. No one cursed. No one shouted. Disappointment had grown tired. The wallkeeper attended prayers like everyone else. But afterward, he returned to the well. Faith did not replace duty. Each evening, he listened to the water below. He spoke to it quietly. Not prayers. Just words. As if speaking might keep it from leaving. The elder walked the village. More often now, he spoke with families, with farmers, with the priest. They discussed rationing again. They discussed timing. When to reduce, when to stop certain uses entirely. Prayer did not stop planning. Both were needed. Children noticed the change in adults. Voices were softer, movements slower. Even arguments felt tired. When disagreements happened, they ended quickly. No one had energy to hold anger. One night, a storm appeared far away. Lightning flickered on the horizon. No thunder followed. People stood outside, watching. Some smiled. Some cried quietly. The storm never reached them. The ground remained dry. That night, many prayed longer than usual. Not for rain, for peace. The fields lay still beneath the sky. They no longer waited. They simply existed. The priest walked among them one morning. Alone. He touched the dry wheat. He said nothing. He understood now that prayer was not a bargain. It was a companion. Something to walk with while waiting. In the village, people began to accept the sky as it was. Not with joy, but with calm. Acceptance did not mean giving up. It meant conserving. Strength dot saving hope for when it might matter. The drought continued, but panic did not. The village had entered a new phase, one where survival was quiet, and faith was no longer about answers. It was about staying present. The sky stayed silent. And beneath it, the village endured. The well had always been there, long before the drought, long before the current houses, long before most names were remembered. It was older than the village itself. A circle of stone set deep into the ground, smooth at the edge from countless hands, cool to the touch, even in summer. Now, it was watched more closely than anything else. The man who kept the well was not important before. He had no title, no land of his own, no loud voice. He was chosen because he was careful, because he noticed small things, because people trusted him to stop when stopping was needed. Each morning, he arrived before the others, before the sun climbed too high, before the line formed. He checked the rope. He checked the bucket. He checked the stone rim for cracks. Then he listened. He leaned forward and lowered the bucket slowly, not to collect water, just to hear. Sometimes the sound returned quickly, a soft, distant splash. Other times, there was only silence. That silence told him more than words ever could. When people arrived, he greeted them with a nod. Nothing more. There was no need for conversation. Each person brought a container. Each waited their turn. He controlled nothing by force. He only watched. If someone filled too much, he gently lifted the bucket back. If someone returned too soon, he asked them to wait. No anger, no accusations, just calm restraint. The village accepted this. They understood that control was not punishment. It was protection. As the drought continued, his role grew heavier, not louder, not more visible. Just heavier. Every decision stayed with him. Every extra splash, every spilled drop. At night, he dreamed of water slipping through his fingers, of stone walls growing taller, of ropes breaking. He woke often. Sometimes he returned to the well before dawn. He sat beside it, resting his back against the stone. The well felt solid. Unmoving. As if it remembered other dry years. As if it had seen villages come and go. Children watched him from a distance. They whispered stories that he could hear water underground, that he spoke to the well, that he knew when rain would come. None of this was true. He knew only what the bucket told him and what the earth allowed. One afternoon, a woman approached the well later than usual. Her hands shook slightly. Her child was sick. The keeper listened as she spoke. He did not interrupt. He gave her a little more water. No one objected. Compassion was part of his duty. Another day, a man argued. He claimed his work required more water, that his animals would die without it. The keeper did not argue back. He only asked, how many animals remained? The answer changed everything. Water followed need, not demand. The elder stood nearby and said, nothing. The keeper was trusted. That trust mattered more than any rule. As days passed, the rope grew longer. The keeper added knots to mark the depth. Each knot meant less water. He remembered the first knot. He tried not to think about the last. The well became a place of quiet tension. People lowered their voices near it. They avoided sudden movements. It felt wrong to disturb something so fragile. One evening, after the line had ended, the keeper remained. He cleaned the bucket carefully. He coiled the rope slowly. Then he lowered the bucket. One last time. The splash was faint, but it was there. He exhaled. That night, he slept beside the well, wrapped in a thin blanket, listening to the night sounds. The village slept too. Dreams were shallow, but sleep came. The next morning, the keeper noticed something different. Not in the water. In the people. They approached the well more slowly. They carried smaller containers. No. One had asked them to. They had learned. This eased his burden. Slightly. The well did not belong to him, but its future rested in his hands. Sometimes, he wondered how many others before him had stood in this place. How many had faced the same silence? How many had listened for water in the dark? He felt connected to them across time, across droughts. The well keeper was not a hero. He did not save the village alone. He simply held the center steady. He made sure no one took too much, that no one panicked, that the village moved together, not apart. As the sun set again, he watched shadows stretch across the stone. The well remained. The water remained. For now, and as long as it did, so would the village. Water became something the village thought about all day. Not with fear, but with attention. Every drop mattered now. People learned to notice water in ways they never had before. The sound it made when poured, the weight of a full cup, the way it darkened the soil for only a moment before disappearing. Morning routines changed first. Faces were no longer washed with handfuls of water. Instead, claws were dipped lightly. Skin was wiped once, slowly. Hands were cleaned only when needed. Before eating, after work, children were taught to rub their hands together before rinsing. Soap was used sparingly. Nothing was rushed. Cooking followed new rules. Pots were filled only halfway. Vegetables were steamed, not boiled. The water left behind was saved. It cooled in bowls. Then it was used again. That same water cleaned knives. Then cups. Then floors. At the end, it went outside, poured carefully at the base of plants near the house. Nothing touched the ground without purpose. Laundry became rare. Clothes were brushed instead of washed. Stains were scraped away. When washing was unavoidable, May garments were cleaned together. One tub, one careful rinse. The water turned gray quickly. Still, it was reused. Bathing disappeared almost entirely. People accepted the dust on their skin. The weight of sweat. Cleanliness became a memory. Health became the priority. The village smelled different now. Not bad. Just human. Earthy. Warm. No one mentioned it. The animals adjusted too. Troughs were filled at set times, not left open. Animals drank calmly. They seemed to understand. Some families chose to release animals they could no longer support. They were led away. Quietly. The sound of bells fading down the road stayed with the village long. After, gardens near the houses were treated with care. Only the strongest plants remained. Others were removed to save water. Shade was created wherever possible. Cloth was stretched. Branches were arranged. The soil was covered with straw to slow evaporation. Old knowledge returned. Things learned from grandparents. From stories told long ago. How to collect dew in the morning. How to dig shallow channels to guide water. How to listen to the land. Children were given small tasks. They carried cups. They watched water levels. They learned early. That care was not a burden. It was responsibility. The well keeper noticed the change. Water lasted longer each day, not because there was more of it, but because less was wasted. The elder watched quietly. He did not praise. Praise could lead to comfort. Comfort could lead to carelessness. Instead, he reminded them gently, tomorrow matters. The village grew quieter. Movements slowed. Voices softened. People rested more during the heat. Work was done early or late. The midday sun was avoided. Time itself seemed to stretch. Days blended together. The drought no longer felt urgent. It felt constant. That constancy brought calm. People adapted. One evening, a child dropped a cup of water. It spilled into the dust. Everyone froze. The child looked up, eyes wide. No one shouted. The well keeper knelt down. He touched the ground. Next time, he said softly, we hold tighter. The child nodded. There was enough. At night, families gathered quietly. They shared bread. They shared silence. Water. Cups were placed in the center. Measured. Fair. People drank slowly. They noticed the coolness. They savored it. Sleep came easier now. Not because things were better, but because routines were steady. The mind rests when it knows what to expect. Dreams became simpler. Walking paths, carrying water, sitting in shade. No storms. No disasters. Just repetition. The fields beyond the village remained dry, but near the houses, small patches of green survived. Not enough to feed many, but enough to remind people that care still mattered. The priest spoke of gratitude. Not for rain, for endurance, for shared effort. He said that saving water was a form of prayer. People believed him. One morning, the well keeper noticed something. The rope did not need to be lowered as far. Not much. Just a little. He said nothing. He watched. Over the next days, the change remained. The water level had stopped falling. It was not rising, but it was holding. This was enough. No celebration followed. No announcement was made. The village continued as before. Careful, quiet, together, saving. Every drop had become second nature. Not a rule. Habit. And habits, once formed, are powerful. The drought continued, but the village had learned how to live inside it. And for the first time in many weeks, that felt like progress. Not everyone stayed. The village never spoke of leaving as a failure. It was simply a choice. A quiet one. At first, it was just one family. They packed before sunrise. No announcement. No farewell gathering. A cart stood near their house, loaded carefully, close. A few bundles of grain. Nothing extra. The children were still half asleep as they climbed aboard. When the cart began to roll, the sound echoed softly through the empty path. A few villagers watched from doorways. They did not wave. They nodded. That was enough. The road out of the village was narrow and dry. Dust rose behind the cart and hung in the air long after it disappeared. The house they left behind stood silent, its door closed, its hearth cold. No one entered. Empty houses were respected. They were reminders. In the days that followed, others began to consider the same choice, not all at once. One by one, each family weighed the same questions. How much grain remained? How many mouths to feed? How strong the children were. How far they could travel. Leaving meant risk. Staying meant patience. Some felt stronger on the road. Others felt safer with the familiar. Neither. Choice was easy. The elder spoke with those who planned to go. He did not stop them. He did not encourage them. He listened. Then he offered what he could. Directions. News of nearby villages. Warnings about dry streams. Sometimes he gave a little extra grain. Not much. Just enough to help them. Start. The well-keeper watched each departure. He felt the weight lift slightly with every cart that left. Fewer people meant less. Water needed. But each empty house felt heavier than water. Children noticed first. They counted houses on their walks. They noticed dark windows. They asked questions. Where did they go? When will they come back? Adults answered softly. They are finding their own way. Some families left at night. They did not want to be seen, not out of shame, out of sadness. Goodbyes made leaving harder. The road did not promise anything. It only offered movement. Those who left walked slowly. They conserved strength. They followed paths near hedges and trees. Shade mattered. Water mattered more. Some carried small barrels. Others relied on memory. Old maps. Old stories. The village did not know what happened to them. Sometimes news returned. A traveler passing through spoke of a family seen near a river, or of a cart broken on a hill. Nothing certain. Nothing complete. The village accepted this. Uncertainty was part of the drought. Those who stayed adjusted again. Empty houses changed. The way sound moved through the village. Footsteps echoed more. Voices carried farther. At night, silence felt wider. Meals were quieter. Fewer bowls on the table. But water lasted longer. Grain stretched further. The elder updated his counts. Quietly. He never said numbers aloud. Numbers made people restless. The priest spoke of community. Of those who remained. Of caring for one another. He also spoke of those who left. He wished them safety. Was all. No blame. No judgment. The fields did not change. The sky did not change. But the village did. Paths were less worn. Lines at the well were shorter. The well-keeper noticed how quickly his work ended each morning. Sometimes he stood alone beside the well longer than before. He missed the quiet murmur of people waiting, the shared rhythm. Even absence has a sound. One afternoon, a child wandered into an empty house. Dust covered the floor. Sunlight fell across bare walls. The child touched the stone, then left. Later, the door was closed again. Respect returned. As weeks passed, the idea of leaving faded for some. They had chosen already. Staying became its own decision. They settled into it. Routine helped Dot wake early, work slowly, rest often, care for what remained. The drought was no longer a question, Dot. It was a condition. Those who stayed learned to live inside it. Those who left carried it with them. The village did not shrink suddenly. It thin. Like hair worn by age. Still present. Just less. One morning, a family returned. Only one. They had gone not far. The river they sought was dry. They came back. Tired. Quiet. The village welcomed them without words. No one asked questions. Their house was open. Water was shared. That night, they slept. The next day, they worked. They stayed. Leaving did not always mean escape. Sometimes it only confirmed where one belonged. As the sun continued its steady rise and fall, the village remained. Smaller. Quieter. But still whole. Those who left were remembered. Those who stayed were counted. The drought continued, but the village did not vanish. It adapted. And in its slow, careful way, it endured. The drought had taken much from the village, but it had also revealed things that were long forgotten. When the land grows quiet, memories rise. It began with the oldest woman in the village. She walked slowly now, leaning on a stick once smoothed by time. Her back was bent, but her mind was clear. One morning, she stood near the edge of the fields and pointed to a shallow dip in the ground. There used to be water there, she said. Not a stream, not a river. A channel. Most people had never noticed it. Grass once grew thicker along that line. Now it was dry like everything else. The villagers gathered. They listened. She spoke of stories told to her as a child. Stories of stone-lined trenches, of water guided from hills. During dry years. Not magic. Work. Careful planning. She said the ground remembered where water once traveled. Always does. The elder listened closely. He asked questions. Slow ones, patient ones. Others joined in. Another old man remembered helping his grandfather clear stones from a narrow ditch. A woman recalled seeing water move quietly beneath the soil after rain. Pieces came together. The village began to look at the land differently. Not as fields and paths, but as layers. Above ground. Below ground. They walked the hills. They followed faint lines in the earth. Lines most had stepped over for years without seeing. Some led nowhere. Others dipped gently, then rose again. One line ended near the forest edge. The soil there felt cooler. Darker. They tested it. They dug. Not deep. Just enough. The earth resisted at first, then softened. A few inches down, the soil held moisture. Not much, but enough. The village gathered tools. Spades, hands, time. They worked slowly. No rush. Rushing broke things. They cleared old stones. They widened shallow channels, not to force water. But to guide it. The well-keeper joined them. He understood water's patience. Children carried small stones away. They worked quietly, proud to help. Women brought cloth to shade the exposed earth. Men took turns digging. Resting was as important as effort. This work did not exhaust the village. It focused it. Each day, They returned to the same spots that they learned the land shape, where it dipped, where it resisted, where it offered help. The priest visited and watched Dot. He said little. He understood that this was also faith. Not in the sky, in memory, in hands. One afternoon, they noticed something. A thin line of damp soil appeared, where none had been before, not flowing. Just. Present. The ground darkened slightly. No one celebrated. They marked the place. They waited. The next morning. It remained. A day later it widened. The village adjusted their efforts. They connected another shallow channel. Slowly. Carefully. Water did not rush in. It seeped. Like breath. The well-keeper checked the well that evening. The rope did not need to be lowered as far, only slightly, but it mattered. He told the elder. The elder nodded. That was all. The village continued. They did not speak of success. They spoke of continuation. Old knowledge was not written. It lived in stories. In habits. In places where the land had once been shaped. The drought had stripped the surface away. Now, the past was visible. At night, the village slept with a different kind of hope. Not the hope of sudden rain, but a slow return. Children dreamed of lines in the earth filling gently. Adults dreamed of steady mornings. No storms. No miracles. Just balance. Work did not end. It became part of daily life. Dig a little. Rest a little. Observe. The fields nearest the channel showed small changes. Leaves lifted slightly. Color deepened. Not enough to save everything, but enough to matter. The village did not try to fix the whole land. They focused on what they could reach. What they could protect. This was wisdom. One evening, the oldest woman returned to the edge of the field. She watched quietly. She smiled, not because the drought was ending, but because something had been remembered. The land had not betrayed them. They had simply forgotten how to listen. As the sun set, the village stood still. Water moved beneath the soil. Slow. Patient. Invisible. Just like before. And for the first time in a long while, the future felt grounded. The heat did not leave when the sun went down. It stayed. It settled into the stones, into the ground, into the walls of every house. That evening, the air felt heavy. Not threatening. Just still. No wind moved through the village. No leaves stirred in the trees. The sky was clear. Stars appeared one by one. They looked sharp, distant. As if the world had grown thinner. People finished their evening tasks earlier than usual. There was no reason to stay outside. Work would not cool the air. Inside the houses, doors and windows were left open. Families sat quietly. Some spoke softly. Most did not. The village had learned how to share silence. Water was served carefully. Cups were filled only halfway. Each sip was slow. Deliberate. The well-keeper walked the seal. Village's darkness settled. He checked the well. The rope felt warm in his hands. The bucket came back with little water. Enough. But little. He nodded to himself. That night, more people slept outdoors. Not far from their homes. Just on thresholds. In doorways. Where the air might move. Children lay on blankets. staring at the stars. They counted them until sleep came. Adults lay awake longer. They listened to their own breathing, to the quiet sounds of others shifting nearby. The village felt close, connected, as if everyone was holding the same breath. The fields beyond the houses lay silent. No insects sang, no animals moved. Even the forest seemed to pause. This was the driest night of the year. The kind of night remembered long after it passed. Some sensed it, without knowing why. The earth itself seemed tight, as if pulled inward. The oldest woman in the village did not sleep. She sat near her doorway, wrapped in a thin cloth. She remembered other nights like this. Not many, but enough. She knew what stillness meant. It was not the end. It was a moment. A deep pause. At the well. The keeper returned and sat on the stone edge. He lowered the bucket once, more not to take water, just to listen. The sound was faint, but it was there. He rested his hands on the stone. It felt warm. Time moved slowly. Minutes stretched. The moon rose higher. Light softened the sharp edges of the village. Shadows lengthened. A dog shifted in its sleep. Somewhere, a child murmured. Then, the village grew still again. No one spoke. No one prayed aloud. Prayer felt unnecessary. This night did not need words. It needed patience. As the hours passed, the heat remained. But something else appeared. A change so small it could be missed. The air grew slightly heavier. Not cooler. Heavier. Moisture. Perhaps barely enough to feel, but enough. The well keeper noticed it. First. His skin felt different. Not dry. Just less tight. He looked up. The sky was unchanged. Stars still clear, but the air had shifted. In the fields, the soil held on to the night. Not releasing its warmth, but not hardening further either. The village slept. Deeply now. Exhaustion carried them. Just before dawn, a breeze passed through. Soft. Brief. It touched cloth and skin, then moved on. It did not cool much, but it moved, and movement mattered. The oldest woman closed her eyes. She smiled faintly. Morning came slowly. The sun rose without ceremony. Its light was pale, less harsh. People woke and sat up. They noticed the change. Not in the sky. In themselves. The air felt different. Still dry, but not empty. At the well, the keeper lowered the bucket. The rope slid smoothly. The bucket returned. There was no more water than the day before, but no less. That was enough. The driest night had passed. Without breaking anything, without taking more than it already. The village moved gently into the new day. They spoke quietly. They worked slowly. No one expected rain, but no one feared collapse either. The drought continued, but the night had taught them something. That even in stillness, things can shift. That not every change is loud. Sometimes survival is simply making it through the hardest night. And waking up. The morning after the driest night felt different. Not brighter, not cooler. Just different. People noticed it as they stepped outside. The air rested more gently on the skin. It did not press down as hard as before. Nothing dramatic had changed, but something had shifted. The village moved slowly into the day. Doors opened. Blankets were folded. Faces turned toward the sky. The sky looked the same. Clear, wide, quiet, still. People felt calmer. The elder noticed it in the way people walked. Less tension, less hurry. As if the night had carried something away. The well-keeper arrived early. He always did. He lowered the bucket carefully. The rope slid through his hands. When the bucket returned, he paused. Inside, the water looked the same, clear, still, but the sound it made was different, slightly fuller. Not much, just enough to notice. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply poured the water into a measuring jar he kept hidden beneath the well's edge. The level was higher, only by a finger's width, but it was higher. The first drop had returned, not falling from the sky, not rushing from the hills. Rising. Slowly. From below. The keeper replaced the jar. He said nothing. Water like this did not need announcement. The village gathered at the well later that morning. The line moved as it always had. Quiet, orderly. No one noticed the change at first. But by midday, someone did. A woman filling her jar paused. She tilted it. Listened. Double quote, "There is more," she said softly. No one reacted. The keeper met her eyes and nodded once. That was enough. Words spread the way calm things do. Without excitement, without rush. Just understanding. The well had stopped losing water. It was holding. And perhaps it was giving back. The elder did not call a meeting. There was no need. People already knew what this meant. Not relief. Not safety. Just possibility. The village did not change its habits. Water was still measured, still saved, still shared carefully. Nothing was wasted. The well-keeper watched closely. He marked the rope again that night. The knot stayed where it was. It did not move lower. That alone felt like progress. In the fields near the old channels, the soil remained dark. Not wet. The live. Plants held their leaves. A little higher. Color returned slowly. No one spoke of harvest. It was too early. Hope was kept small, manageable. Children noticed frogs near the shaded ditch one afternoon. Just one. Still. Watching. No one chased it. They let it be. At sunset, clouds appeared far away. Thin. High. Did not promise rain, but they moved. That night, people slept deeply, without dreams. Just rest. The village had not been saved. Not yet. But it had been answered. Not with us. Abundance. With balance. The priest spoke briefly the next day. He thanked the village, not the sky, not fate. The people. For patience, for care, for listening. The drought continued, but it no longer felt endless. The first drop had returned. Quietly. And the village remained ready. The rain did not arrive the way people imagined. There was no thunder, no dark wall of clouds. No sudden change. It came quietly. So quietly that many slept through the beginning of it. The morning had started like many others. Clear sky, pale light. The village moved slowly into the day. People worked as they always had during the drought. Carefully, patiently. Water was still measured, still respected. Nothing had been loosened yet. By midday, the air felt different again. Not cooler. Heavier. As if something unseen was moving through it. The well-keeper noticed. First. He always did. The rope felt damp when he touched it. Not wet. Just damp. He looked up. High above, thin clouds drifted across the sky. They were not dark. They did not threaten. They simply passed. The village continued. Its routines. No one stopped to stare. Clouds had come before. They had promised nothing. In the afternoon, the wind shifted. Very gently. Leaves turned. Dust settled. The air grew quiet. Then, without warning, a single drop fell. It landed on the stone near the well. No one noticed. A moment later, another fell. Then another. Still, no one reacted. The rain was too soft to demand attention. It did not splash. It did not rush. It rested on rooftops, on cloth, on skin. Someone finally looked up. "It's raining," they said. The words were spoken calmly. No excitement. No shouting. People stood where they were. They felt the drops touch their faces. Slow. Cool. Real. The rain did not increase. It did not turn heavy. It stayed gentle. Steady. As if testing the ground. The earth accepted it quietly. There was no runoff. No puddles. The soil drank everything. Children stepped outside. They held out their hands. They laughed softly, not loudly, as if afraid to scare the rain away. Adults followed. They did not cheer. They closed their eyes. They breathed. The priest stood in the doorway of the church. He said nothing. Words felt unnecessary. The rain continued. Minute after minute, drop after drop. It soaked into dry wood, into cracked stone, into thirsty soil. The fields darkened slowly. Color returned. Not bright, just alive. The rain lasted less than an hour. When it stopped, the sky remained gray. Clouds moved on. No storm followed. No second wave came. That was all, and it was enough. The village stood still. No one rushed to change habits. No one ran to the fields. They knew better. Rain was a gift, but it was also fragile. That night, the village smelled different. Fresh. Cleaned. The dust had settled. The air felt lighter. People slept deeply, with windows open. With calm hearts. In the morning, the well-keeper checked the water. The level had risen. Not much, but clearly the rope needed less length. The bucket sounded fuller. He marked it carefully. The elder visited the fields. He knelt. He touched the soil. It held together. It did not crumble. He stood, slowly. He smiled, just a little. The village returned to work, but the work felt different now. Not desperate, hopeful, still careful, still slow. No one spoke of the drought as something past. They spoke of it as something remembered. The rain had come, not to erase, but to continue. The village understood. Rain was not an ending. It was a pause, a breath. They would need more, but they had learned how to wait. How to save. How to share. The sky had answered, quietly. In its own time, and the village, patient and prepared, was ready to listen. The rain did not return the next day, and the village did not expect it. They had learned patience. They had learned that waiting was not weakness. It was part of survival. The morning sun rose behind thin clouds. Light passed through softly. The ground still held the memory of rain. Soil stayed dark beneath the surface. The air felt cleaner. Easier to breathe. People stepped outside and paused, not to look at the sky, but to feel the ground beneath their feet. It felt solid. Again. Alive. The drought was not over. Everyone knew that. But something had changed. Inside the village, something quiet, something lasting. Water was still measured. The well keeper did not loosen the rules. No one asked him to. They trusted him more than before. Each jar was filled carefully. Each drop respected. There was no fear in this, only understanding. The fields responded slowly. Shoots stood a little taller. Leaves unfolded wider. Green returned in small patches. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. The village moved with the same rhythm. Slow steps, steady hands. The elder gathered the people near the well. One evening. Not for warnings, not for rules, just to speak. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand above them. He stayed level. Like the land. We survived, he said. Not proudly. Simply. Double quote. We survived because we listened. He spoke of the channels. Of shared water. Of restraint. He spoke of the children who carried stones, of the elders who remembered old paths, of the hands that worked together. No one applauded. No one needed to. They felt it. The drought had taken much, but it had given something back. Unity. The priest walked the village more often. Now. Not to pray. To listen. He sat with families. He drank small cups of water. He nodded. The church doors stayed open. Not for sermons, for shade, for rest. Life continued. Slowly. Weeks passed. Rain came again. Light. Brief. Enough. Each time the village accepted it calmly. They did not celebrate. They did not beg for more. They trusted the rhythm. Children returned to playing near the fields. Not far. Always watched. They learned where water flowed. Where not to step. They learned by seeing. By doing, not by being told. The drought became a story, not a wound. A lesson. Shared. Carried forward. One evening, as the sun lowered, the well keeper removed the extra marks from the rope. Not all of them, just a few. The water had stabilized. The village noticed. They smiled, quietly. That night, lamps glowed warmly behind windows. People slept with ease. Not from comfort. From peace. The village was never the same. Not because the rain returned, but because the people had changed. They understood. Now. Water was life, but so was care. So was patience. So was each other. Years later, travelers would pass through. They would drink from the well. They would ask how the village survived the great drought. The villagers would answer simply, "We listened." They would say and then they would smile. Because sometimes survival is not about fighting the land. It is about learning to live with it. Years passed. Not quickly, not loudly. They passed the way seasons always do. One day at a time. The drought became something people spoke about less often. Not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer hurt. The land healed. Slowly. Fields returned to their steady green. Crops grew again. Not large, not overflowing, but enough. Always enough. The well remained the center of the village. Its stone stayed cool. Its rope stayed strong. Children grew into adults beside it. They learned its sound. They learned its weight. They learned when it was full and when it needed care. No one ever took water for granted again. Not even in the wet years. Especially not then. Rain came. When it wished. Sometimes often. Sometimes rarely. The village did not argue with the sky. They listened. They adjusted. They remembered. The old, Channels remained carved into the land. Even when they were not needed, no one filled them in. They were left as they were, as reminders, as quiet lines of wisdom. Elders told stories at night, not dramatic ones, simple ones, about dry mornings, about careful hands, about waiting. Children listened. They did not always understand, but they remembered the tone, the calm, the patience. That was enough. Travelers still came through the village. They always noticed the well. They always noticed how carefully water was used. They would ask why. The villagers never gave long answers. They would say things like, "We learned the hard way," or "The land teaches if you listen." Sometimes they would say nothing at all. Silence carried meaning too. The priest grew old. He walked more slowly. He spoke less. But when he did speak, people leaned closer. He reminded them not to fear dry days and not to waste wet ones. Before he passed, he left one sentence carved into the church door, not a prayer, a reminder. Care is stronger than fear. The well-keeper trained his replacement patiently, without rush. He showed him the marks on the rope, the ones that had been added, and the ones that had been removed. "These are not rules," he said. "They are memory." When the old keeper died, the village mourned quietly. They drew water the next morning. As always, life continued, because that was the lesson. Does not stop, it adapts. The village never became rich, never famous, never large, it stayed. Small, steady, balanced, children were born. Old ones passed. The well stayed, the land stayed, and the memory stayed too. Even during seasons of plenty, the village kept its habits. They shared, they measured, they waited. They listened, because once you survive something together, you do not forget how. On quiet evenings, when the air grew still, people would sit outside their homes. They would listen to the wind move through leaves. They would listen to water moving below the stone. They would feel peace, not because everything was perfect, but because they understood what mattered. The drought had not broken them, it had shaped them. And that shape lasted, long after the dry days ended, long after the rain returned. The village did not remember the drought with fear. They remembered it with respect and gratitude, because it taught them how to live, together, slowly, carefully, as the night deepens now, and this story settles. The village grows quiet once more. Lights dim, footsteps fade. The well rests beneath the stars, and everything is calm, just as it should be.